and welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm joined today in the studio by Simon Zutshi and also by Evan Main-Donald. Welcome back, gentlemen. Also remotely, we have joining us today Paul Mahoney. So I'm going to get stuck into some questions. Evan, this one is for you. I own a property which has a shop on the ground floor and a two-storey flat above it. Both leases have 1 year left. Now there's a housing shortage locally, so I'm thinking of changing the use and creating 3 small flats instead. Does this sound sensible, and are there any points I should look out for in considering this?
Okay, well there's a few things you need to think about here. And probably the two main ones are planning and legal. So we'll start with planning. If there is not something called an Article 4 direction, which is something that withdraws permitted development rights in the area that your shop is located in, and you need to just check that with the local planning authority, then you can convert the shop to residential accommodation using permitted development. And in order to do that, you simply need to make an application for prior approval to convert the shop. And that should not be refused unless there's some good reason, planning policy reason that the council can come up with that under which they can refuse the application. Usually the only one would be that there's an Article 4 direction in force. If there is an Article 4 direction in force, you may still get consents to convert it, but you'll need a full planning application. So that's your first place to start. Is it going to be relatively easy? In other words, is it permitted development, or do I have to go through the full planning process? The other thing you need to watch out for with a retail premises is covenants. So it's possible that you may have a covenant on the premises that prohibits certain uses, and there could be a covenant that prohibits residential use. It's possible to get some covenants removed, particularly if the person that put the covenant on no longer is around. If they put it on 100 years ago, then there's a process that you can use to get a covenant taken off. If the covenant is enforceable, you can generally negotiate with the person who put the covenant on to maybe make a payment to them to get that removed. So that's another thing to watch out for. The other final thing is if you've got a retail tenant in there, you need to understand what sort of a lease they're in under. With commercial leases, they can either be inside or outside the Landlord and Tenant Act. If the lease is inside the Landlord and Tenant Act, and you need to look at the lease to determine this, and you may need to get a solicitor to advise you on it, then the tenant has an automatic right of renewal of the lease. Now, there are only certain grounds under which you can get a tenant out. One is redevelopment of the property, and I'm fairly sure that conversion from retail to residential would apply, but you would need to get your permissions in place first, and then you would need to follow the right procedure for getting the tenant out under those grounds. Otherwise, the tenant could claim security of tenure, and you may find yourself in a situation where you're obliged to grant them a new lease.
Well, I mean, these things are important, especially if you're converting it from to a residential from a commercial property, as we know. Fabulous. Okay.